The overhead fluorescent lights in the boardroom buzzed at a frequency Dana had learned to hate over the past 9 years. Colonel Marisol Ferreira sat at the center of the long table, 3 other panel members flanking her. A manila folder closed in front of each of them like a row of small, silent verdicts. Captain Reyes. Ferreira's voice carried no warmth, no hostility either. Just procedure. You access the case file for Red Grove County case number 24CR-05517 without authorization. That case involves your sister. Yes, ma'am. You pulled evidence logs after being explicitly told to recuse yourself. Dana's hands stayed flat on the table in front of her. Yes, ma'am. Explain. She had a version of the truth ready, the careful one, the one that made her sound reasonable instead of desperate. She opened her mouth to give it. My sister has been missing for 6 days, she said instead. And somebody tampered with my own field notes before I ever got the chance to log them. A pause moved through the room, the kind that meant several people were deciding how much of that to believe. Your badge and credentials are suspended, effective immediately, pending review, Ferreira said. Do you understand? Dana looked at the folder in front of Ferreira, the one she hadn't opened, and thought about the 6 days that had already passed. Yes, ma'am, she said. I understand. She didn't. A paper airplane crashed into the refrigerator, and Lily laughed so hard she nearly slid off the kitchen stool. Yours always crashes, Aunt Dana. Mine flies straight into obstacles, Dana said. It's a strategy. That had been 11 days ago. Dana kept doing the math without meaning to. The way you press on a bruise to check if it still hurts. 11 days since paper airplanes. 6 days since Yasmin didn't answer her phone at the time she always answered her phone. 6:15, right after Lily's bath, right before the nightly call the two of them had kept up since Dana shipped out the first time, and needed to hear her sister's voice more than she needed sleep. Dana still had 4 years of those calls saved as voicemails she never deleted. She knew it wasn't healthy keeping them. She called the number anyway sometimes, let it ring through to the same message, just to hear Yasmin say, "Hey, it's me, leave something." Their father used to say something Dana had carried through 2 deployments and 9 years of investigative work. Follow the thinnest thread, not the loudest voice. He'd been a beat cop for 30 years in a small town nobody outside the county could find on a map, the kind of career that left him with more patience than most people had for anything. He gave Dana his old badge clip the day she graduated the academy, brass worn soft at the edges where his thumb had rubbed it for 3 decades. She still carried it in her jacket pocket, not the badge itself, just the clip, small and unremarkable, exactly the kind of detail nobody else would think to look for. She'd never told Trevor that story. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because some things felt like they belonged only to people who'd earned them. That last Sunday before Yasmin vanished, the two of them had spent the whole afternoon in Yasmin's kitchen, while Lily folded a fleet of paper airplanes across every flat surface in the house, naming each one with the specific seriousness 6-year-olds bring to things that don't matter to anyone but them. Yasmin had laughed more that afternoon than Dana had seen her laugh in months, teasing Dana about her terrible flying technique, threatening to sign her up for remedial folding lessons. "You're supposed to be the scary investigator," Yasmin had said, watching another one of Dana's planes nosedive into the pantry door. "How do you catch anyone if you can't even fold paper right?" "I catch people," Dana said. "I do not fold origami." Lily had laughed so hard at that she'd had to sit down on the floor, and for a few hours that afternoon, nothing in the world felt like it needed watching. Dana thought about that afternoon more than she wanted to admit in the days since, the ordinary shape of it, the particular ache of not knowing, in the moment, that you're living inside the last easy day you'll have for a while. Trevor. Dana turned the name over carefully now, the way you'd handle something that might have gone bad in the fridge without a smell to warn you yet. Yasmin married him 9 years ago, a wedding Dana had stood up in wearing dress blues, toasting a man she'd liked well enough at the time, easy laugh, good with kids, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order. He worked in commercial real estate, or said he did, though Dana had noticed over the years that the specifics of his job shifted depending on who was asking. She'd chalked it up to sales guy vagueness. Everyone had a cousin like that. What Dana understood only later, piecing it together the way she pieced together everything, was that Trevor had spent most of his adult life a half step behind men he considered his equals, watching them make partner, close deals, buy the kind of houses that got photographed for local magazines, while his own ventures kept dissolving quietly into something smaller than what he'd promised Yasmin at the altar. He never said that out loud, not to Dana, maybe not even fully to himself. It showed up instead in small ways, the way he changed the subject whenever a family gathering turned toward money. The way he'd started, in the last year or two, describing his business in the future tense, always about to close, always one deal away. 2 months before Yasmin disappeared, Dana had stopped by unannounced and found Trevor on the back porch on a call she wasn't meant to hear, voice low and sharp in a way that didn't match the easy laugh she remembered. "I told you I'm handling it. Just give me until the end of the month." He'd hung up fast when he saw her, smiled too wide, said something about a difficult client. She hadn't pushed. Some quiet trained into her by 9 years of interrogation rooms told her that some questions were better asked when you already had an answer waiting. She hadn't had an answer waiting. Not then. Yasmin called her the week before she vanished, voice careful in a way Dana only recognized in hindsight. "Can I ask you something weird? Always. If something happened to me, not like, dramatically, just, if something happened, would you make sure Lily was okay?" Dana had laughed it off at the time, told her sister she was being morbid, asked if everything was fine at home. Yasmin said it was fine, said she was just thinking about wills and life insurance, adult stuff, since Lily started kindergarten. Dana hadn't thought about that conversation again until 6 days ago, and now she couldn't stop turning it over, the particular careful weight of the word if. Colonel Ferreira had pulled her aside 2 days before the missing persons report was even filed, back when this was still just a sister not answering her phone, and not yet a case number. "You look like you haven't slept," Ferreira said, not unkindly. "Family stuff, ma'am. That'll do it." Ferreira studied her a beat longer than the comment required. "You'll let me know if it becomes something CID needs to be aware of." Dana had said she would. She hadn't understood yet how fast that would become true, or how completely it would put her on the wrong side of every rule she'd spent 9 years enforcing. The morning Yasmin's neighbor called 911, Dana was 2 states away at a training exercise, and by the time she got back to Redgrove County, local police had already walked through the house, already found nothing forced, no signs of struggle, Yasmin's car still in the driveway, her purse still on the counter. Lily had been at school. Trevor said he'd come home from a supposed business trip to find the house empty, said he'd assumed Yasmin took Lily somewhere, hadn't panicked until the school called asking why nobody had picked her up. Dana had stood in her sister's kitchen that first night, staring at a coffee mug still sitting in the sink, and thought, whatever happened here, we'll figure it out as a family. She had no idea yet how much weight that sentence was about to be asked to carry, or how many of the people saying it to her over the coming days would turn out to mean something else entirely by it. A manila folder sat half-buried under a stack of mail on Dana's own kitchen counter, the kind of place you set something down meaning to deal with it later and then forget you did. She'd requested her original field notes from the responding officer 3 days after the report was filed, standard procedure, the kind of paperwork trail she'd built a career on trusting. The folder had come back through official channels that morning, stamped, logged, entirely unremarkable. She almost didn't open it until after dinner. The handwriting was hers. That was the first thing she noticed, and for half a second it felt like relief, like proof that at least one thing in the last 6 days was exactly what it claimed to be. Then she read the second page. Subject appeared emotionally volatile during initial interview. Possible history of conflict between missing party and reporting family member. Dana sat very still at her own kitchen table, the coffee she'd poured 20 minutes ago, going cold beside her hand. She had never written that sentence. She remembered the initial interview clearly, remembered standing in Trevor's kitchen, asking careful, procedural questions, remembered writing down exactly what he told her, word for word, nothing about volatility, nothing about conflict, because there hadn't been any to write down. She flipped back to the first page. The handwriting there was unmistakably hers, small and slanted the way it had been since the academy. The second page, the one with the sentence she'd never written, was close. Close enough to pass a glance. Not close enough to survive someone who'd been writing in that hand for 9 years. Her phone buzzed. "Callum, you seeing this?" he said, no greeting, straight into it. "I just got handed a copy for the file review. Page 2 doesn't match your report from the 12th. "I know. I'm looking at mine right now." "Dana." A pause, careful. "This is the version that got flagged to Ferreira. This is why you're sitting in a disciplinary hearing instead of working the case." She set the folder down slowly, like it might still be doing something if she moved too fast. Someone replaced a page in an official CID file, she said. That's not sloppy handwriting, Callum. That's a federal offense. I know what it is. I just don't know who had access. Dana thought about the evidence room. Badge in only, logged entries, a system she'd trusted without question for 9 years, because trusting it was the only way the job worked. She thought about Trevor's kitchen, the careful, rehearsed cadence of his answers that first night, the kind of calm that either meant innocence or a man who'd had time to prepare. She thought about the phone call on the porch. I'm handling it. Just give me until the end of the month. I need the intake log, she said. Whoever checked this file out before it came back to me. That's going to take an official request. You're suspended, Dana. You can't pull that yourself. Then you'll do it. Callum was quiet for a second on the other end. You know I will. I'm just saying it out loud so we're both clear on what we're doing. After they hung up, Dana sat alone in her kitchen a long moment. The folder open in front of her. The wrong sentence sitting there in handwriting close enough to fool a stranger and nobody else. Case number 24 CR-05517, Red Grove County. She'd read that number stamped across the top of her own field notes a dozen times since the folder came back, and each time it felt less like a case reference and more like a verdict already being written about her, one page at a time, by someone patient enough to get the handwriting almost right. She thought about her father's voice, worn into memory the way his thumb had worn the brass on that badge clip. Follow the thinnest thread, not the loudest voice. Everyone had been telling her the loudest thing for 6 days. Missing person, grieving husband, suspended investigator, too close to the case, too emotional to trust. She could feel the shape of that narrative closing around her every time she picked up her phone. 3 missed calls from an unlisted number that morning alone. A voicemail from a cousin of Trevor's she barely knew, gently suggesting maybe Dana should step back and let the professionals handle it. As though 9 years of being one of the professionals had somehow stopped counting the moment the missing woman became her own sister. The thread was thinner than that. A page that almost matched her handwriting. A phone call about handling something by the end of the month. A sister who'd asked, a week before she vanished, whether Dana would take care of Lily if something happened. Dana pulled out her phone and looked at the missed call log from the past 6 days, scrolling until she found the one number that had appeared and disappeared faster than any of the others. A call to Trevor's phone the morning of the disappearance, one she hadn't thought to flag until just now. It had lasted 4 minutes, long enough to plan something, short enough to feel routine to anyone glancing at a phone bill without knowing what they were looking for. She sat with that number a long time, turning it over the way her father used to turn over a case file at the kitchen table when she was young, before she understood what any of it meant, only that some numbers held more weight than their digits suggested. 4 minutes. Long enough for 2 people to agree on something they both intended never to say out loud again. She didn't know yet exactly what those 4 minutes contained. She only knew, sitting there with a folder full of lies close enough to pass, that somebody had gone to considerable trouble to make sure nobody ever asked. Grace Abernathy's lab smelled like ink and cold coffee. Evidence trays stacked along one wall in a kind of orderly chaos only she seemed able to navigate. You brought me a partial print off a fabricated page, Grace said, not looking up from her microscope. That's not usually how people ask for favors. I'm not most people right now. Grace glanced up at that, something softening slightly in her expression. She'd worked with CID for 11 years, retired, semi-retired really, still took cases when Callum called in a favor, which was exactly how Dana had ended up in this cluttered civilian lab, instead of a proper evidence room she wasn't allowed to enter. Give me 20 minutes, Grace said. Dana waited in a hard plastic chair that had clearly been salvaged from somewhere else, watching Grace work with the particular patience of someone who trusted process more than urgency. It wasn't a patience Dana had much of left. She spent the 20 minutes doing the things she'd promised herself she wouldn't do anymore, scrolling back through old photos of Yasmin on her phone, birthdays, a hiking trip 2 summers ago, Lily's first day of kindergarten with Yasmin, crouched beside her looking prouder than Dana had ever seen anyone look about anything. When Grace finally looked up, her expression had changed. Partial thumb, she said. Not yours. Not the responding officer's. I already checked against the file. Whoever handled this page left a print in the margin, probably didn't even realize it. Can you run it? I can run it against civilian databases if there's a match on record for something. County employment background check, concealed carry permit, anything that requires prints. Grace hesitated. It's not going to hold up as court evidence, not through this channel, but it might tell you something. Run it. The search took longer than Dana wanted, long enough that she found herself pacing the narrow strip of floor between two evidence tables, thinking about Lily's face at the kitchen counter, paper airplane in hand, no idea yet that her mother's disappearance had become a puzzle other people were quietly rearranging. Callum called while she waited. "I pulled what I could on Trevor's finances," he said. Discreetly. "This isn't official, so don't ask me how." "I won't ask." "He's underwater, Dana. Not late on a car payment underwater. Real trouble. Multiple lines of credit maxed, a name that keeps showing up in his call log, connected to a collections operation that isn't exactly the kind you find in the phone book." Dana's stomach tightened, a feeling she recognized from years of watching cases turn from confusing into something with actual shape. How much trouble? Enough that a life insurance policy taken out on Yasmin 18 months ago starts looking like something other than responsible planning. She thought about the phone call. Yasmin's voice, careful, deliberately light. "If something happened to me, would you make sure Lily was okay?" "That's not a missing persons case," Dana said quietly. "That's a motive." "I know. I also know we don't have enough to bring to Ferreira yet. Suspicion isn't a warrant." Grace's search finished with a soft chime. She turned the screen toward Dana. "No civilian match," she said, "but there's a partial hit on a joint bank account signature card. The print's a rough match to a Trevor Kessler, filed with the bank 3 years ago when the account opened." Dana stared at the screen a long moment, the careful, procedural part of her brain already assembling the argument someone would make against this evidence, the part that knew a partial civilian print wasn't proof of anything a court would accept. The other part of her, the part that had spent 6 days watching everyone treat her sister's disappearance like an inconvenience to be managed, wasn't thinking about court yet. "I need his bank records," she said. "The actual account activity, not just the signature card." Grace's expression shifted, careful now. "That's not something I can pull, Dana. That requires a warrant, or a court order, or someone with the right access who owes a favor. You're suspended. If you do this and it comes out, you're not looking at a disciplinary hearing anymore. You're looking at criminal exposure." Dana looked at the partial print on the screen, then at the folder still sitting in her bag, the page with handwriting close enough to be hers, and wrong enough to matter. "My sister's been gone for 7 days, she said. "I'm not asking you to do it. I'm telling you I'm going to." Grace held her gaze for a long moment, something weighing behind her eyes. "There's someone I know," she said finally, quiet. "Used to work bank fraud investigations before she went private. She might be willing to look at something informally, if it's framed the right way." She paused. "I'm not telling you to do this. I'm telling you the door exists." Dana thought about her father, 30 years of following threads, other people called too thin to matter, and the particular kind of patience that had never once meant looking away, when looking away was easier. "Give me the number," she said. Grace wrote it on the back of an old business card and slid it across the table, and for a moment, neither of them said anything, the weight of what Dana was about to do settling into the space between them, like something that had already happened. "For what it's worth," Grace said finally, "I think you're right about him. I've read a lot of fabricated pages in 11 years. Whoever wrote that second page in your file wanted it to look sloppy, not deliberate. That's harder to fake than people think." Dana pocketed the card. "Thank you, Grace. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your sister's home." Dana called Priscilla Doyle from the parking lot, before she'd let herself think too hard about what she was starting. Doyle answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice clipped. Professional. The voice of someone who'd learned to sound unbothered by favors that could end careers. "Grace says you're former CID. Suspended CID," Dana corrected. "As of 11 days ago. That's usually the point in these conversations where people stop being honest with me. I'd rather you know exactly what you're agreeing to." A pause on the line, considering. "Send me what you have. I'm not promising anything until I see the shape of it." Dana sat in her car outside the lab, a long time after that call ended, engine off, both hands on the wheel, like she was driving somewhere, instead of sitting still. Case number 24-CR-05517 didn't feel like a number anymore. It felt like a countdown she couldn't see the end of, only the steady certainty that whatever Trevor was doing, he wasn't doing it slowly. Colonel Ferreira's voice cracked through the radio earpiece pressed into Dana's ear. steady despite the tension threading through every word. Confirmed address. Abandoned property. Route 9, half-mile past the old grain depot. Thermal shows one heat signature. Second floor. Dana crouched behind the open door of an unmarked sedan 200 yards out, night vision goggles pushed up on her forehead, waiting for the word that would let her move. Callum knelt beside her, weapon drawn, eyes fixed on the dark shape of the building ahead. The bank records had taken 4 days to unravel properly. 4 days of Priscilla Doyle working quietly through Trevor's accounts. 4 days that ended with a single transaction that changed everything. A large transfer requiring dual signature authorization, one that had been sitting frozen for a week because it needed Yasmin's authentication code, something only she could provide. He hadn't disappeared her. He'd needed her alive and cooperative until the money moved. Ferreira had authorized the tactical response an hour ago, once the property records connected the abandoned house to a shell company Trevor had quietly set up 18 months earlier, around the same time he'd taken out the life insurance policy nobody was supposed to notice. Case number 24CR-05517 had, by that point, grown a second file behind it, this one detailing wire fraud and financial exploitation, thick enough that Ferreira had needed a second folder just to carry it into the briefing. 2 minutes to breach, Ferreira said. Reyes, your observation only. Am I clear? Clear, ma'am. Dana's jaw tightened around the word. She'd fought for this, fought Ferreira for 3 straight hours the night before. Suspended or not, badge or not. This was her sister, on the other side of that wall. Ferreira hadn't relented on the tactical entry, and wouldn't put a suspended officer with a personal stake anywhere near the breach point. She'd relented on one thing only. Dana got to be close enough to hear it happen. The team moved in formation across the overgrown lawn, black shapes against a darker building, no lights, no sound beyond boots on wet grass. Dana's hands tightened around nothing, around the badge clip in her jacket pocket that she'd been holding since they left the staging area. She thought, absurdly, of paper airplanes crashing into a refrigerator, of Lily's laugh filling up a kitchen that had felt safe right up until it hadn't, and made herself breathe slower than her heartbeat wanted to allow. Go, Ferreira said, quiet and final. The front door came off its hinges, with a sound that carried across the field. Flashlight beams cut through broken windows. Dana heard shouting, muffled through distance and old walls, the specific controlled chaos of a team clearing a structure room by room. Then, through the radio, Callum's voice, tight, second floor, we've got her. Dana was moving before she'd decided to move, past the sedan, across the wet grass, ignoring every instruction she'd just agreed to. She reached the doorway as they were bringing Yasmin down the stairs, wrapped in a tactical blanket, pale and unsteady but upright, her eyes finding Dana's across the wreckage of the front hall. Dana, Yasmin's voice broke on the single syllable. Dana crossed the space between them without any memory of crossing it, arms around her sister, both of them shaking, Yasmin's grip fierce and desperate against Dana's jacket. I knew you'd find me, Yasmin said into her shoulder. I kept telling myself you'd find me. Trevor came out through the back a moment later, hands zip-tied, flanked by 2 deputies. He caught sight of Dana over one deputy's shoulder and stopped walking for a second, long enough that the deputy had to tug him forward. You don't understand what I was trying to protect, he said, loud enough to carry across the yard. You'd have done the same thing in my position. Everybody would. Dana didn't answer. She kept her arms around her sister, but some part of her, trained by 9 years of interrogation rooms, filed the sentence away exactly as it had been said, because she understood, hearing it, that Trevor still believed there was a version of this where he'd been the reasonable one. Ferreira appeared beside them a moment later, her expression unreadable in the dark. He talked in the truck on the way out, she said, quiet enough that only Dana could hear. Not much, enough. What did he say? Ferreira's jaw tightened slightly before she answered, like she'd debated whether to share it at all. He said the money was never about hurting anyone. Said your sister was just the key he needed until it moved. She paused. Said it like that made it better. Yasmin's grip on Dana's jacket tightened at the words, though whether she'd heard them or simply felt something shift in her sister's posture, Dana couldn't tell. He's in custody, Ferreira said. That's what matters right now. The rest gets sorted later. Dana nodded, though later felt like a word without real shape yet, standing in the wreckage of a house that had held her sister prisoner for 7 days, the badge clip still clenched in one fist, the other arm still wrapped tight around the one person she'd refused to stop looking for. Paramedics moved Yasmin toward a waiting ambulance a few minutes later, and Dana walked alongside the gurney the whole way, not letting go of her sister's hand until the doors closed between them. Only then did she let herself turn and look at the house properly. Really look at it. The peeling paint, the boarded second-floor window Yasmin had been kept behind, the shell company's name still visible on a faded real estate sign staked crookedly in the front yard. Callum found her there a few minutes later, radio clipped back onto his vest, expression carefully neutral in the way Dana had learned, meant he was choosing his words. "You broke about 4 different instructions getting to that doorway," he said. "I know. Ferreira's going to have something to say about it. I know that too." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded once, the particular nod of someone who understood exactly why she'd done it, and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "For what it's worth, I'd have done the same thing." They stood together a while longer in the wet grass, watching the property fill with more vehicles, more lights, a scene assembling itself around the wreckage of what Trevor had built. Dana kept turning the badge clip over in her pocket, her father's voice still moving through her, the way it always did in moments like this, quiet and certain. Follow the thinnest thread. She thought about how thin the thread had actually been. A phone call on a porch, a page written in handwriting close enough to pass, a life insurance policy nobody was supposed to notice, and how none of it would have mattered if she'd let the loudest voices in that boardroom convince her to stop looking. The county hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and vending machine coffee, the particular combination Dana had come to associate with every worst week of her life. Yasmin sat up in the hospital bed, IV line taped to the back of one hand, color slowly returning to her face after 2 days of fluids and rest. Lily was curled against her side, having refused to leave since the moment they'd been reunited. One small hand fisted in the fabric of her mother's hospital gown, like letting go might undo something. "He kept saying it wasn't personal," Yasmin said quietly, staring at the wall across from her bed. "Like that was supposed to help." Dana sat in the chair beside the bed, badge clip still in her jacket pocket, though the jacket itself no longer had any official standing attached to it. "You don't have to talk about it yet." "I know." Yasmin's hand found Dana's, gripped it. "I just keep thinking about how normal it all looked, right up until it wasn't. 9 years, Dana. 9 years, and I never once saw it." "Neither did I." Callum appeared in the doorway, a folder in hand, expression carefully neutral in the way Dana had learned, meant he was choosing his words. "Ferreira wants to see you," he said to Dana. "Both the hearing outcome and something else." Dana kissed her sister's forehead, promised Lily she'd bring more paper for airplanes tomorrow, and followed Callum down the hallway to a small consultation room where Ferreira waited, seated, hands folded on the table in a posture Dana recognized from the disciplinary hearing 11 days earlier. "The suspension is lifted," Ferreira said without preamble. "Effective today, full reinstatement." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet." Ferreira's expression didn't soften. "The unauthorized access to Kessler's bank records, the informal channel you used to get it, that's still a problem. A serious one. I'm recommending a formal reprimand rather than termination given the outcome, but I want to be clear that the outcome doesn't erase the method." Dana held her gaze. "I understand, ma'am." "Do you?" Ferreira leaned forward slightly. "If that transfer had already cleared, before we found the property, if the money was gone, and your sister was gone with it, would you have made the same choice?" Dana thought about the 4 days of silence, waiting for Priscilla Doyle to find something, the specific helplessness of knowing a clock was running and having no official way to stop it. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I would have." Ferreira studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. "That's the answer I expected. It's not the one that makes this easier. No, ma'am. The reprimand goes in your file. It follows you. Understood?" "Understood." Ferreira nodded once, closed the folder in front of her, and for a moment, something almost gentle crossed her expression. "Your sister's alive because you didn't wait for permission, Reyes. I need you to understand both halves of that sentence, not just the part that feels good." Dana walked out of that consultation room, lighter and heavier at the same time, the strange doubled weight of a reprimand and a reinstatement arriving in the same breath. She found Grace Abernathy waiting near the hospital entrance an hour later, having heard through Callum that the case had broken, still in her lab coat like she'd left in a hurry. I wanted to see for myself, Grace said, that she's actually all right. She will be. And you? Dana thought about the question longer than it probably deserved. I will be too. Eventually. Grace studied her a moment, the same patient look she'd worn over the microscope days earlier. You know that reprimand doesn't cancel out what you did. Ferreira made that clear. I don't mean it as a caution, Grace said. I mean it as a fact. Both things are true at once. You broke a rule, and you saved your sister's life. The department gets to keep its rule. That doesn't mean the rule was right about you. Priscilla Doyle called 2 days later, her voice carrying the same clipped efficiency it had on their first call, though something warmer had crept into it now that the danger had passed. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the file officially. The frozen transfer led investigators to 2 more accounts. Trevor wasn't just moving money to survive the collections agency. He'd been quietly diverting funds from the shell company for over a year. Small amounts, the kind that don't trigger flags unless somebody's already looking. How much? Enough that this stopped being a domestic case and became something federal is going to want a piece of. Doyle paused. For what it's worth, Captain Reyes, most people who call me asking for favors are trying to hide something. You were trying to find something. I don't forget that distinction easily. Dana thanked her and sat with the phone in her lap a long moment after they hung up, thinking about how many threads had started from a single partial thumbprint in the margin of a fabricated page. How much of this had depended on people willing to bend a rule quietly, rather than watch her lose everything by the book. Trevor's arraignment happened 3 weeks later, a courtroom Dana attended in her dress uniform, sitting beside Yasmin in the gallery, while a prosecutor read charges that included kidnapping, insurance fraud, and financial exploitation. Trevor didn't look at either of them once during the proceeding, his eyes fixed somewhere on the middle distance, the careful, easy charm Dana remembered from his wedding toast entirely absent now. Outside the courthouse afterward, Yasmin stood on the steps for a long moment, sunlight catching the still-healing bruise along one wrist where restraints had been. I keep waiting to feel like it's over, she said. It's not. Not all at once. Dana put an arm around her shoulders. But it's starting to be. Lily ran ahead of them down the courthouse steps, arms out like airplane wings, and for a moment, the sound of her laughter filled up the space where 7 days of silence had been. The training yard at Fort Bellwood still smelled like cut grass in early evening, the kind of ordinary detail Dana had learned not to take for granted anymore. She stood at the fence line with Lily perched on the top rail beside her, watching a squad run drills in the fading light, Yasmin a few feet away on a bench, still healing but steadier now, 6 months out from a night neither of them talked about often, though it lived somewhere close to the surface for both of them. Grandpa's badge clip, Lily said, pointing at the small brass piece Dana had let her hold for the walkover. Mom said he gave it to you. He did, told me to follow the thinnest thread, not the loudest voice. Dana crouched down to Lily's height. You remember that, okay? Doesn't matter how big or loud something is. Sometimes the truth is in the small, quiet thing nobody else bothered to check. Lily considered this with the particular seriousness of a 6-year-old turning over something too big for her yet, the way she'd started doing more often since the hospital, since the courtroom, since the version of the world that included what her father had done to her mother. Is that how you found Mom? That's exactly how. Ferreira's formal reprimand still sat in Dana's file, a permanent mark she'd learned to carry without letting it define her, the same way she'd learned to carry the 6 days of silence that came before the rescue. She'd made the promotion board despite it, or perhaps, as Ferreira had said once in passing, partly because of it. The report had come with fewer words, but they landed harder. Reyes doesn't wait for permission when it matters. That's a liability until the day it isn't. Trevor's trial was still months away, the process slower than anyone wanted, prosecutors building a case methodically around the frozen transfer and the shell company and the additional accounts Priscilla Doyle had uncovered, a paper trail that had taken people far more patient than Dana weeks to fully untangle. He hadn't spoken to Yasmin since the arraignment. Yasmin hadn't asked him to. Grace still called every few weeks, ostensibly to check on Yasmin, though Dana suspected it was as much about making sure Dana herself was still standing. She'd started, in small ways, treating Dana less like a favor she'd once done, and more like someone she'd simply decided to keep in her life, dropping off case files she thought Dana would find interesting, the kind of quiet, undramatic loyalty that Dana had learned, over the last 6 months, to recognize as rare and worth holding on to. Do you think he ever loved her? Lily asked. her voice smaller now, the question of a child trying to make sense of a father who had become something unrecognizable. Dana thought about that carefully before answering, the way she'd learned to weigh her words around Lily since all of this began. I think some people convince themselves that fear is close enough to love that they stop checking the difference, she said. It isn't the same thing, not even close. Lily nodded slowly. In the particular way children accept complicated truths without needing every piece explained, and went back to studying the badge clip in her palm, tracing the worn brass edge with one finger. Yasmin called out from the bench, something about getting home before dinner, and Lily hopped down from the rail, handing the badge clip back to Dana with the same careful ceremony she gave most things that mattered to her lately. Dana slid it back into her jacket pocket, the metal still warm from her niece's hand, and watched the two of them walk ahead toward the car, Lily's laugh carrying back across the field, ordinary and unbroken in a way that felt, after everything, like its own kind of victory. If you were in Dana's position, would accessing those bank records without authorization have felt justified to you, or does the fact that it worked not excuse how she got there? Let me know what you think in the comments. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There's another one waiting next week.